Okay, I'm going to briefly go into a little more information on sprites today. So the first thing I want you guys to be familiar with is GameMaker. It does have some capability for creating sprites. As I showed you before, you can go in and actually create a sprite from scratch by clicking on the canvas, okay? You can also, once you double click on that, you have your stuff created. There is more things that you can do within there though. So you can use these tools to draw various things similar to paint, okay? Just make sure that you adjust your size because the smallest size is the default and you're almost never going to be able to even see that, okay? Also, you can erase things just like paint when you make a mistake. You can adjust your colors over on the right hand side here. One important thing I will point out is that your opacity should actually be at 255. Occasionally it gets set back to 0 for some reason. 0 means it's invisible, okay? So if you're drawing things with one of your tools, you have the size correct, you have your colors correct, and yet it's not showing up, check your opacity. That may be the issue, okay? So you can draw things in here. It's especially good if you're doing pixel type art, okay, because you can use these types of things, squares, rectangles, circles, all different stuff, and you can create some decent pixel art within it, okay? So there's also the capability to delete backgrounds, okay? So for an example, my character here has this awkward white background around it. If you find an image offline instead of creating your own, you're probably going to have an awkward type background like that. If you want to remove it, an easy way to do that is to go to Edit Sprite, Images, and erase a color. So as you can see, it's going to see that background erased, okay? The gray checkered background actually means it's invisible within the game, which is what you want, okay, instead of the white. You can adjust the slider. If you go and it shows more white, okay, for an example, sometimes it just doesn't remove it all. You can adjust the slider to get rid of that. And then once it's to where you want it to be, just click OK. And then you can see that your image looks quite a bit better without that white. Another thing to remember is if you double click this image, you can use your mouse wheel to zoom in. So this will help you, especially if you're doing pixel art. Or if you just want to clean up the image yourself, you can zoom in quite a bit to erase even more background if it's needed. Okay, so because occasionally if it's an awkward size or maybe the colors are too close together, it won't completely delete it. You can use the erase tool and just do it manually as well. Okay, and this is also where you would do your drawing. Okay, and you could zoom in to get that pixely look as you're creating it so that you know how it's going to look. Once you're all done, green check mark, always, always, that's what saves it. And if I go into my room, which I already have the player there, now you can see that without that white background, it really does look quite a bit better. I can do the same with these if I want, or anything else. So obviously instead of erasing the white color, I would be erasing the yellow, but it does work, okay? So as I go in each of my rewards, I go into edit, and I go ahead and erase a color. I can adjust it as needed on the slider, but that looks pretty good, so I don't feel that I need to. And you can just make changes as it goes. This doesn't matter as much when you create your own sprites from scratch, but if you're using online ones, they're almost always going to have a background, and it can really take away from your project. So keep this in mind. It's such a quick and simple process. You may have to use your slider a little to make it a little more perfect, but overall, it does a very good job. And it's something that can really add a lot to it without as much effort, okay? So there we have all of those done. We're good to go. And then if I look in my room, this just looks quite a bit more polished than it did before. Okay, so my objects here, there, and I can put them closer to the ground, you know, so that they look a little more realistic, my candles and things. But overall, it already looks much better than it did when I had those awkward backgrounds all around, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing is Photoshop. So very briefly, I'm just going to go over the very basics of Photoshop. These are not advanced features. There are a ton of references on my tutorials page on my website, a ton of YouTube videos out there to help you get familiar with Photoshop more, especially if you're very interested in 2D animation and 2D art. But for now, I just want you guys to have the basic background to be able to create a game. So I showed you the basics as far as going to File, Open. You can open the backgrounds that you want. And you can open multiple, okay? See what I did? I just go to File, Open, and it still is there, okay? It just creates another tab. This is particularly helpful when you want to move one image onto another, okay? So maybe you're creating a background and you want something there. So an example would be I have this great beach scene, but I want a beanbag on the beach, okay? So the first thing I need to consider is what size do I want it? So for this, I want it to be 1024 by 768 because I know that's what our backroom size is, okay? And I had to uncheck that constrained properties, which is this little link here on the new version, or on the old version, you check the box, okay? So 1024 by 768, it'll automatically adjust our size for us. And this size is currently 1500, so it's bigger than that image. So if I took it over there right now, it would cover the whole thing, which I obviously don't want. I'm going to go ahead and check constraint properties because I don't mind if it stays the same on both. And I'm going to make it 200. And this is just a random number based on what I want it to look like. First of all, if I wanted to crop any of this out, I can use the crop tool. Just like Paint, you click here, you select it, and when you hit enter, it'll remove anything outside of what you just selected. You can also do the eraser tool, and if I zoom in here, it'll help me out. So that I can erase the background with any color that I want. Currently I'm on here. It's already white, but if I want to do white I can. You can also choose background eraser, so if you wanted to actually do that checkered like you see in GameMaker so that there's no background, you can do that here. I personally think it's a little easier in GameMaker, but this is more precise when you zoom in if you have an awkward shaped item, okay? So we'll just quickly do this. This is by no means perfect. And now my background is erased. Okay, so that's your background eraser. You also have a paint tool, just like in the actual paint, okay, if you need to fill a bigger space. You have the text tool if you're wanting to add text in here. Maybe you're doing your title screen in here. But two important tools that I want to point out, the ones that you'll probably use more than anything. So you have your image size, the select tool. Okay, this is rectangular, elliptical. This one you can do lasso, polygonal, magnetic. Magnetic just means that it goes pretty closely to the edge of where you're going. And once again, if you do this, a little better, you can actually get this pretty exact, but I'm going to do this pretty quickly just to show you. And now you have the selected, but it keeps moving, right? So you hit enter when you actually want to select what you're at. But now the selection tool is still on there, so you have to actually go back up to the top here to this little icon with the arrow to drag it onto somewhere else. Okay, so we're going to just click and keep your mouse button held, drag it up to the tab of the picture you want it on, and then drop it where you want it, and then you can move around. So now we have this nice beanbag on the beach. Okay. So that's particularly useful if you're wanting to do some sort of cutscene or you're needing to add items to your background before you actually put it in GameMaker, okay? So that's an easy way to do it. One other thing that I've found particularly helpful in Photoshop is this eyedropper tool. This lets you point to a sample and choose that exact color. So if you're trying to fill a little gap in or color match something, you can click on it, and as you can see, it adjusts to that color. Then you can use your paint tools, erasers, anything else that you're using to actually fill it in. But it's just useful, especially if you're using something that maybe has a logo on it or something like that that you're needing to cut out, you can do it that way. And also by mentioning that, do not use copyrighted images, okay, without permission from the person, unless it is solely for education based, okay? Now, if it's for this class, I will always tell you if you can use them or not, but if you do use images that are copyrighted, I do expect you to put the information on your credit screen to let me know who actually created that image, where did you get it from. If it's something that's for an external contest, something that may get posted on my website, something like that, I will tell you ahead of time no copyrighted images to be used whatsoever because it is illegal if it's not being used solely for education or something along those lines. So always check with me if you're unsure. Any basic questions about Photoshop, let me know. Like I said, it's a pretty standard we only use a few of the functions in here until we get more advanced into animations. But if you learn the basics of these first few here, you'll be able to do more than enough for this first year course. So hopefully that was helpful.